The other day I walked into one of those second-hand clothing stores, the kind that smell of nostalgia and a little bit of dust. In a corner I saw a group of young people almost fighting to the death over a pair of Levi's 501s, visibly worn, with a tear at the knee that seemed to tell a story. The price was frankly absurd. Just a few meters away, hanging on a rack in a department store, you could find the same model, brand new and shiny, for almost half the price. And yet nobody wanted them. What the hell is going on here? How is it possible that a brand that literally invented jeans is worth more dead than alive? Because this isn't just a story about fabric and rivets, it's the chronicle of how America's greatest cultural icon lost an entire generation and is now desperately fighting to win it back. To give you an idea of the chaos, at the beginning of 2024, Levi Strauss & Company announced that it would lay off more than 10% of its global workforce. This, right after a period in which its revenues seemed to be stabilizing. The company is projecting sales growth of just 1 to 3% for this year. Figures that, in the fast-paced world of fashion, are the equivalent of standing still while everyone else is running a marathon. The brand that once dressed rebels, rock stars and presidents is now struggling not to become the kind of clothing parents only buy for the weekend. So, how did we get to this point? How did a brand that survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the bell-bottom pants of the 70s almost drown in the 21st century? To understand this downfall and its controversial attempt at a comeback, we need to break down 5 major mistakes. 5 lessons in marketing and consumer psychology that explain why your grandfather's pair of Levi's is ironically much cooler than the ones in stores today. Stick with me, because this story has more twists than a pair of jeans that's way too tight. To begin with, we have to talk about the curse of being the original. Let's go back to 1873. A Bavarian immigrant named Levi Strauss and a tailor named Jacob Davis have a revolutionary idea: reinforce miners' work pants with copper rivets at stress points. They patent the design, and the first blue jeans are born. For decades, that's all they were: durable, reliable, boring workwear. They were the sliced bread of clothing. They didn't excite anyone, but they got the job done. They weren't selling fashion, they were selling durability. Their unique selling proposition was simple: these pants won't tear. Change came with Hollywood. Suddenly, Marlon Brando in The Wild One and James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause turned those workman's pants into the official uniform of youthful rebellion. Schools banned them, parents hated them, and of course, that only made teenagers want them more. Levi's didn't even have to do any marketing, the culture did it for them. They became a symbol without even trying. In the 60s and 70s, hippies wore them at Woodstock and in anti-war protests. They were a blank canvas onto which an entire generation projected their ideals. Levi's wasn't selling pants, it was selling identity. And for almost a century, it worked perfectly. But here's the catch of being the pioneer. You become complacent, you assume you'll always be king, and you stop paying attention to the barbarians gathering at the gates of your castle. And those barbarians arrived at the end of the 90s. Which brings us to the second point: getting caught in the crossfire of fashion. Suddenly, the jeans market became brutally polarized. On one side, you had the explosion of designer denim. Brands like Diesel, 7 for All Mankind, or True Religion weren't just selling pants. They were selling status. These were jeans costing $200 or $300 with strange washes, exaggerated stitching, and in the case of True Religion, back pockets with rhinestones that screamed, "I spent way too much money on this." They were exclusive, aspirational, and celebrities wore them. Levi's, with its $60 models, couldn't compete in that arena. But the real blow came from the other end: fast fashion, with giants like Zara and H&M. They started producing jeans at a ridiculous speed and price. You could buy a pair of jeans that mimicked the latest runway trend for $20. Why spend $60 on classic Levi's when you could have 3 different, trendy pairs for the same price? Levi's found itself in fashion's no man's land. Too expensive to compete with fast fashion, but not exclusive enough to compete with luxury. They became the middle child that no one invites to parties. It's like opening a restaurant that's neither cheap and fast, nor elegant and delicious. It just exists. And in the world of consumerism, just existing is the kiss of death. Young people wanted the low-rise jeans they saw in Britney Spears' videos, not the dad jeans their father wore to mow the lawn. When a brand doesn't know who it is, it starts making desperate marketing decisions. And this brings us directly to the third mistake, one of the most pretentious and out-of-touch advertising campaigns in recent history. In 2009, in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, Levi's launched its Go Forth campaign. The ads were visually stunning, cinematic, full of attractive young people running in slow motion through fields and ruined cities, while a narrator recited Walt Whitman poems about revolution and the pioneering spirit. The problem was that you could barely see the jeans. The timing couldn't have been worse. The campaign was launched when the youth unemployment rate was through the roof and an entire generation felt cheated by the system. And Levi's was telling them, "Stuck in a dead-end job? Drowning in debt? Don't worry, put on our $80 jeans and go out to build a new world." It was an insult. A critic summed it up perfectly. The campaign romanticized struggle without understanding its reality. It was as if your landlord, instead of fixing your broken heating in winter, read you an inspiring poem about the beauty of frost. Despite investing millions, the campaign had no impact on sales. It showed a lack of empathy and understanding of the cultural zeitgeist that was almost comical. Marketing that talks down to the consumer instead of talking with them is destined to fail spectacularly. But bad marketing was only a symptom of a much deeper disease. The real problem, the one that infuriated the most loyal customers, was in the fabric itself. And this is the fourth and perhaps the most unforgivable mistake, when the legend falls apart in the washing machine. For decades, Levi's reputation was built on a simple promise: indestructible quality. The denim was thick, durable, and got better with time. But as the company moved its production to other countries to cut costs in the 90s and 2000s, something fundamental broke. The quality plummeted. The fabric felt thinner, the seams were weaker, and the iconic fit of the 501 was no longer the same. Internet forums filled up with frustrated customers, complaining that their new Levi's would tear or lose their shape after just a few washes. The irony was brutal. People were paying more money for second-hand Levi's jeans from 20 years ago than for the brand new ones in stores. That's not nostalgia, that's a product crisis. They were betraying their core value proposition. To make matters worse, scandals broke out over working conditions in some of their supplier factories, with accusations of exploitation and forced labor. For a brand that sold the authentic American dream, the hypocrisy was devastating. Between 2001 and 2011, sales plummeted, dropping by almost a third from their peak in the 90s. Levi's was bleeding relevance and seemed to have no tourniquet. The company was in freefall. They needed a savior, and they found one in an unexpected place, an executive from Procter & Gamble who knew more about selling Pringles chips than about fashion. In 2011, Chip Bergh was appointed CEO, and his diagnosis was direct and brutal. Levi's had lost its way by trying to be everything to everyone. His plan was not to chase the latest trend, but to go back to basics, to what made the brand great. And here we enter the fifth phase, the rebirth, or perhaps the mirage of nostalgia. Bergh did three incredibly smart things. First, he fixed the product. He invested in improving the quality of the denim, bringing back the feel and fit of the classic models people loved. He rebuilt trust from the fabric outward. Second, he radically changed the marketing. He ditched the pretentious poetry and launched the Live in Levi's campaign. The approach was simple and brilliant. Instead of inventing grandiose stories, they celebrated the real stories people had with their jeans. They showed artists, musicians, and everyday people whose lives were intertwined with their Levi's. The slogan was brilliant because it came from a consumer truth. You wear other jeans, but you live in your Levi's. It was authentic, it was real, and it worked. And third, they innovated intelligently. They launched the Waterless project, which drastically reduced water usage in production. They opened tailor shops so customers could personalize and repair their jeans, promoting sustainability. They started selling their own second-hand products, capitalizing on the vintage trend that they themselves had sparked by lowering their quality. Suddenly, Levi's was cool again. The return to the stock market in 2019 seemed to confirm that the giant had awakened. But today's world is even wilder. Ultra-fast fashion brands like Shein and Temu operate at a frightening speed, using artificial intelligence to copy a TikTok trend and have it for sale within days. Meanwhile, Generation Z demands real transparency and sustainability, not just slogans. Levi's caught a stroke of cultural luck when Beyoncé released her song Levi's Jeans. And this time, the brand knew how to seize the moment with collaborations and collections that sold out instantly. They proved that they still had that magic touch. However, the financial reality remains tough, with modest growth forecasts and the constant need to restructure. The question that remains is whether this revival is sustainable or just one last burst of glory driven by nostalgia. Can a century-old brand built on heritage and quality really compete in a world obsessed with instant novelty and the lowest price? They've shown they can survive, but leading is another story. So the next time you see someone paying a fortune for a pair of old Levi's, don't think they're crazy. They're buying more than just a pair of pants. They're buying an idea, a legend of quality and rebellion that the brand itself almost destroyed. And that's the paradox of Levi's. Its greatest asset is its past, but it's also its greatest burden. Do you think Levi's will manage to reinvent itself for the new generation? Or is it destined to become a museum piece? Have you noticed that difference in quality between jeans from before and those made now? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And speaking of iconic brands that stumble spectacularly, if you think Levi's story is a roller coaster, wait until you see the collapse of this other company. It's another fascinating case study. I'll leave the video right here for you. Thank you for joining me.